Cafeteria spirituality of the fake Christian and the unbeliever. The second way in which we can observe the Dunning-Kruger spirituality of the unbeliever is in what they define as a spiritually good and a spiritually bad. Here the problem is not the unbeliever's refusal to acknowledge that there are some external moral standards to which he should submit himself. Rather, it is defining what specifically those standards are. Unbelievers may be happy to accept some moral demands, but they have their sacred cows that cannot be sacrificed. In contemporary Western society, the most sacred cow is perhaps a sexual liberation, the freedom to have sex with whomever one pleases, whenever one wants. But there can be other sacred cows, and often it depends on the individual in question. The problem of Christianity for all unbelievers is that it is the most stringent ethical system in existence, calling on all to die to the lusts and ambitions of their flesh and to live their lives for the glory of God. External conformity to many of God's commands seems reasonable enough in society so long as those particular commands do not impinge on or require the death of what the Apostle Paul called the flesh. But the pervasive nature of the Bible's commands and its authoritative stance leave no room to make exceptions. This is where the typical unbeliever's spirituality differs from the true believer. The unbeliever does want to make exceptions. If he is religious and grew up in a Christian setting, he may seek to associate with other people who call themselves Christians, but he will only do so if they conveniently pick and choose what biblical commands that they have to follow and what commands they can leave out. This is what happens in most liberal denominations that want to sanctify contemporary culture's obsession with and widespread approval of heterosexual sex outside of marriage and of homosexual sex. They will follow the Bible in other areas, but they will find some excuse not to follow the Bible when it comes to sexuality. Of course, they will not characterize it that way. Instead, they will offer some justification for why the Bible does not really require sexual abstinence outside of heterosexual marriage. But the effect is the same. It is a cafeteria religion in which they seem to obey some rules to which it seems sufficiently easy to conform outwardly, but they will simply ignore the commands that are really hard to obey. Those hard rules would require them to resist the strong temptations to sins that they love. The person who does not pretend to be a believer has a much easier job in filling his plate with cafeteria spirituality. He has no supposed holy book that requires him to engage in mental or verbal gymnastics to avoid its demands. For his spirituality, he can simply pick and choose whatever moral principles and inspiring social media quotes he wants to follow, and simply make contemporary exceptions for himself when he wants to break one or more of them. If one compares these unbelievers and fake Christians with a true Christian, the difference is in what they define as sin. They simply surrender to the sins whose temptation is really hard to resist, and they baptize their sinful acquiescence by saying that it is not really sin. For those who simply surrender to sins whose temptation is really hard to resist and then baptize it by saying it's not really sin, what this means is that they really do not come to know how weak they are spiritually. They have a higher estimation of their spiritual strength because they do not engage the strongest enemies in the war. They surrender to them. By contrast, the true believer does fight against all sins, and his battle against the strongest of temptations makes him realize how strong the foe of sin really is. The more he sees its strength, the more he seems weak in comparison. He becomes spiritually stronger in his resistance, but the end result is his decrying even more vehemently how great his weakness is. We thus come to the Dunning-Kruger effect in the life of the unbeliever and of the false believer in comparison to the life of the true Christian. The true Christian confesses yet more of his weakness, even as he grows spiritually stronger and is battling against all sin. Meanwhile, the unbeliever and false believer think themselves spiritually stronger than they actually are, and look with scorn on the true believer's self-confessed weakness, simply because the unbeliever and the false believer surrender to the strongest of sins instead of resisting them.
Thank you for listening. Credible Faith is a global missions-minded apologetics ministry with content available in 7 different languages across 7 websites: German, Russian, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and English. If you would like to support the global apologetics work of Credible Faith, go to crediblefaith.org and click on the donate icon. If you would like me to give an apologetics workshop or participate in a debate at your university, or if you would like me to give a Great Commission missions conference or apologetics conference at your church, get in touch with me through the Contact Us section of the Credible Faith website. You can also submit a request through the website to get Credible Faith's monthly email. If you are a native speaker of Russian, German, Italian, French, Spanish, or Portuguese, and if you notice that an essay from the English website is not available on the Credible Faith website for your language, feel free to get in touch with me about translating the essay, and I would read through your translated material for quality control and the desire to see content from the essay made available in your language. Thank you for listening, and have a great night.